Hello and welcome to the 905er. I am Joel McLeod.
And I'm Roland Tanner.
The COVID-19 pandemic has reshaped much of our economy and our society. As our economy shut down in March, the federal government stepped in with the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, otherwise known as CERB. It was a way to provide relief to an unprepared EI system and to give assurance to suddenly unemployed Canadians that they would be able to make it through this crisis. However, that has started to come to an end. 2 weeks ago, the federal government tabled a throne speech to address the COVID-19 crisis. In that speech, they laid out plans to end CERB and transition to a more robust EI system. All this has rekindled talk of implementing a universal basic income for Canadians who need it during this pandemic. It has been a controversial topic to be certain, with support and criticism from all over the political landscape. Former prime ministers have gone on the record in support, while members of the opposition are concerned for the productivity and competitiveness of our economy. The thing is, we've experimented with UBI in the past, in Dauphin, Manitoba in the 70s, and more recently in our own backyard here in the 905. In the previous Liberal provincial government here in Ontario, an experiment was begun to put a number of low-income individuals on a UBI and see what happened. These individuals were picked from Thunder Bay, Peterborough, Brantford, and here in Hamilton. We reached out to one of the organizers of the implementation of this experiment, Deirdre Pike, as well as a recipient, Jessie Golem, to talk about what was learned from the experience before it was inexplicably ended by the current Ford government. We want to talk to them about what they used the money for and what they'd like to see happen in the future in regards to UBI implementation in Canada. As well, make sure that you stay tuned after the interview, as we're going to talk about an ongoing issue of integrity in Hamilton City Council and what it says about municipal politics there. In the meantime, here's our talk with Deirdre and Jessie.
Yes, well, welcome Deirdre and Jessie to the podcast. Thanks very much for joining us today. I thought I would just start off by reading a couple of quotations from the photographs that Jessie took as part of a project that came out of the Basic Income pilot project in Ontario that was cancelled in 2018, early 2019. So just a couple of the many quotes that are on Jessie's website. I was using the basic income to improve my health and safety at home. I made commitments for this money. Now I'm stuck. And promise made, promise broken. UBI has helped me become an active volunteer, artist, and entrepreneur. It can do the same for you too. So those are just two examples, and highly recommend anybody go to Jessie Golem's website at jessiegolem.com, I believe, /humans of basic income.
That's true. humansofbasicincome.com, the website is coming, but I am at the mercy of my website designer, who said about 2 weeks ago that it'll be 2 to 3 weeks. So
well, that's great, and highly recommend people go and look at that. They're wonderful, they're beautiful photographs, and really the messages are very powerful. So I thought we'll get started. Just speaking to Deirdre, can you explain to anybody who doesn't know yet, what is basic income? How does it work? And I understand there are different ways in which basic income can be implemented. What are the argued advantages for it?
Well, those are a lot of questions. They're all rolled up in supposedly one. Yeah. Let me say that a basic income is a tool for income security that provides a floor for people across the board. It levels the playing field. We all start out at the same. It is a tool that is monitored through income tax, so it is a different way of doing things, but similar in some ways to the child benefit. So what is the basic income? It is it's something that is known to Canadians through both how we provide income at the lower end for children through the Canadian Child Benefit, and then at the other end of the age spectrum where we provide old age security. I am not saying that either of those are sufficient, certainly not the old age security end of things. But these are examples of what is a guaranteed annual income or a basic income that sets the floor, levels the playing field, and then is monitored through an annual check through income tax.
So in some ways, basic income is not a new concept. It's actually a concept we're familiar with. It's just that we're looking at it now in a new context where it would apply to adult working age people as well as children or seniors.
That's right. That's right.
Now, Jessie, you were actually a recipient of you were part of the pilot project. Could you speak to us about how you came to be involved, what the experience was like, and then what happened when it was cancelled?
Yeah. So myself, much like many of my friends in the city that I live in, Hamilton, are part of the working poor or part of the gig economy. So before I was on basic income, I had 4 jobs. All of them were contract work, minimum wage jobs that I was working 60 to 80 hours a week in a very, very stressful, it was just a very stressful life. And I'd be up in the morning at one job. I'd be in the afternoon at another job, in the evening at another job. And in between, I was trying to build my business as a freelance photographer and finding it very, very difficult to build my business because I didn't have the money and I didn't have the time. So even despite working all of these hours and working nonstop, I still was living paycheck to paycheck, still very much in poverty and still unable to sort of get myself out. And finding it very hard to start a business in the middle of that because you need a level of capital investment and you need amount of time to be able to start a business. You need to be able to have the time to work on the business and still have that guarantee that you can still pay for your costs of living every month and pay all your bills and buy food and pay your rent or whatever it is. And I just wasn't able to find that balance just because the nature of the world that we live in. And it wasn't due to anything on my part. It just is due to the nature we live in. So then when the basic income pilot sort of came up, I was on my phone, just, scrolling Facebook or whatever it was, whatever social media, saw an article about it in CBC or The Spectator or some major media outlet and thought, and the requirements to sign up for the basic income pilot was that you had to reside in either Hamilton, Brantford, Lindsay, or Thunder Bay, and you had to be making less than $30,000 a year, which I definitely fit that category. So I was just like, well, why not? Let's do this. So my roommate and I went to an information session in December of 2017. And then in February of 2018, I found out I was receiving a basic income. And I remember that day, I got the letter in the mail and I was just kind of like, cool, guess I'm getting a basic income. I got to go work now. So I went off to work and was busy doing, gazillions of jobs back to back to back and stressed and exhausted. And then finally, at the end of the day, I was thinking about basic income and thinking about what this means. And the big thing I thought was my rent is covered. Oh my God, my rent is covered. I can pay my rent. And no matter what happens, I can afford my rent. And I started sobbing in the car, thinking about that and that kind of relief that it brought. So I was really, really happy. And I was able to drop down and focus entirely on my photography business. And then what I was seeing is that my business was growing. And I was booking clients regularly and booking photo shoots. And I had a whole business plan figured out. And I had time. That was a big thing. I had a lot of time. And then I was actually making more money on my photography business than I was stuck in all of those jobs and just, barely surviving. So that was another big thing. And then I was just thinking, I had it all projected. I had a business plan written out and projected that I would have only needed to be on the basic income pilot for 2 out of the 3 years. It was supposed to be a 3-year pilot. And 2 years in, I would have been making enough money off of my business that I wouldn't have needed to stay on the basic income pilot. And then obviously the government, there was an election and the Liberal government that brought in the basic income pilot was replaced by a Conservative government. And the leader, Doug Ford, had numerous times gone on the record and has said, it's in the public media, that he would not cancel the basic income pilot. except that was literally the first thing he did when he got elected. He barely waited a month and then canceled the basic income pilot without any reason that had any verifiable evidence. In fact, he just didn't want it anymore. And the money was already spent, so it was wasted. The research was like we had to scramble to get research, but the research was ultimately compromised. And it was just widely regarded as like a stupid move, for a lack of a better word. And that's about as nice as I can possibly say about it. So I was devastated and furious, and that's sort of where my portrait series was born, because I wanted to tell those stories.
So Jessie, so what happened to you once the program ended?
So the day that the basic income got canceled was the day I decided to shelf my photography business, because I realized I wouldn't be able to do that and not have that guarantee to be able to pay rent. And then I started going into humans basic income. So I started finding other basic income recipients. What first happened was that I reached out to people. Like I thought of this idea very, very, very quickly. And then I decided to reach out and try and find as many people as I could. And in my outreach, I met a guy named Tom Cooper, who is the executive director at the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. And he invited me to come to an event at Queen's Park where there was going to be like sort of a protest, and we can like talk to some MPPs about the basic income pilot and the cancellation and how this is affecting us. And Deirdre was there, actually. She was there on that ride. So I showed up to that event. We took a bus there together, like a big old school bus. And I showed up with my camera, some cardboard, and some coloring markers. And I just asked the other basic income recipients to write on the signs, like, what were they using basic income for? How did it make their lives better? Like, what did basic income mean to you? And then I got people to hold those signs, and then I took those pictures. And then those photos, they went viral right away. They were shared over 500 times just from my personal Facebook. So then I developed like a social media and a Twitter page, and I called it Humans Basic Income. And like the photos have been exhibited in many major exhibitions. Like actually Deirdre helped me get the photos exhibited at Supercrawl, which is Hamilton's big weekend arts festival that draws over 100,000 people there every year. It was also exhibited in the Contact Photography Festival in Toronto, which is North America's largest photography festival. And then I went and exhibited my photos at the North American Basic Income Congress in New York City, and then the Basic Income Earth Congress in India. So these photos in this whole story has just taken me on this really weird and beautiful and wonderful journey that keeps on manifesting and doesn't really seem to be stopping. Like, it's been 2 years now, and we're still having these conversations, and especially now because of COVID-19 and how the pandemic has really brought the world to its knees and exposed the economic cracks in our society, the conversation hasn't been more relevant. And so the stories are still relevant.
So just to touch on your project, what some of the people who were using the pilot project, can you say like what they were using it for? Just kind of a broad touch on that.
A lot of people were using basic income to go back to school or start businesses like myself. A lot of people were investing in their children. So being able to, get healthier food for their kids or spend more time with their kids or get them into like extracurriculars and stuff that they may not have otherwise afford. A lot of people moved into safer and more secure housing. I saw that a lot, and a lot of people like stopped going to food banks and were able to go to the grocery store and buy healthier, good food and have like full pantries. So a lot of people were like getting out of poverty. And that was interesting too, because you could see like a physical transformation from a person getting out of poverty, and they look healthier, they look happier, they look less stressed, they look a lot more optimistic. And then with the cancellation, seeing those same people like fall right back into poverty, which was also like stressful and awful and terrible to see as well. So
yes. So I would say Jessie is not understating the physical impact of the cancellation of basic income. And in fact, I wrote a column about Michael Hampson, who was one of Jessie's portraits. And the impact on his health was so positive when he was on basic income, what he could accomplish, how he was able to advocate for himself just went up exponentially. And he was a voice speaking out and really participating in community. Then the cancellation happened. And, he lived in terrible conditions as it was. And being plunged right back into poverty was the dark of night for him. And his sister lost touch with him. He kind of disappeared for about a month, and then he was dead. And the police showed up, and that was the end of Michael Hampson. And I believe very clearly that there is a correlation in that case, and the negative impact of the cancellation, especially after so many people's lives hinged on it, and were told by that it would continue. And when it didn't, it was just devastating.
Just at a purely human level, quite apart from anything else, to be given a promise that, like Jessie explained so well, that, I don't have to worry about this, and then to have that taken away is just it's irresponsible, really. I mean, it's I can only imagine how awful that was to sort of suddenly have that taken away from you.
At the same time, I think it's important to note that basic income is not only a tool for lifting people out of abject poverty. There are people who have been languishing for decades on Ontario Works or disability programs. And while definitely the basic income, the pilot in Ontario, lifted people out of that poverty, it also was impactful for low-income workers that weren't necessarily, by definition, in poverty. And this is a key piece of this tool, that it really is universal. And I think that must be a principle in the application of this. And that's only one. There's many principles that need to be applied to ensure that it is equitably distributed, because it is a tool, as some have warned, in the hands of the wrong government, could be used in a way that isn't positive on people's lives. The pilot that we're talking about, only in 1 year, showed how positive the way that this income was being distributed was working. But there are other models, and where we're at now is a time where we have time to dig into those models, because currently we must be advocating for basic income to be implemented or piloted again, if necessary, by the federal government. And that's where I think our efforts are right now. And Jessie's been part of that with artists, and I've been part of that as a community of women across Canada.
So I mean, and just to sort of dig into that a bit more, I mean, how do you think the COVID situation, obviously with a lot of people, for a greater number of people needing government assistance all of a sudden, how do you think that changes the conversation and the ability to have the entire concept kind of treated more seriously at all levels?
Well, I just think we want a ton of converts. I mean, the pandemic has just shown everyone, no matter what their political affiliation may have been before, that in a time like this, government intervention is necessary, and it's going to be necessary for a long time. And to me, we did miss an opportunity in Canada to transition the CERB to a basic income. And we had the throne speech now. Basic income was not a part of that. And so our work is cut out for us as advocates around income security in this country to keep the pressure on the current government to consider moving in that direction.
On that note, I mean, it looks like we're going into a second wave here in Ontario. Just today, the provincial government was announcing the need to limit interactions even more so. And the Toronto public health officer was recommending that people don't go out unless you absolutely need to. and that we should stay indoors, and our social bubble should just be whomever is inside our household. So it does look like we're going back into more restrictive measures. And I'm wondering, this might be our lifestyle for the foreseeable future, of this kind of going into some form of a lockdown, then we come out, then we go back in until we have a vaccine, and until that vaccine is distributed widely enough across the country to have that herd immunity. Is it still important to have a UBI model or some kind of permanent mechanism on the table? Because right now the federal government they've ended CERB, I believe today or this week. We're going to be transitioning to some form of robust EI program. But I mean, shouldn't we have some kind of more permanent model for the foreseeable future?
I think so. I think that as a country, we would be more equipped to handle this kind of crisis if we had a permanent basic income and had that guaranteed income there for when millions of people lost their jobs overnight, and it's looking like the thing is going to happen again. And like, these are like essential workers and people who work at restaurants and people in industries like the music industry and performing arts industries that have been unemployed for months and months and months with no foreseeable chance to get reemployed again. So I think we would be more equipped and prepared if we had a basic income and stop doing these patchworks of programs. Because like, one thing I found with both CERB and this whole robust EI is that a lot of people are confused and not sure like how to apply for it and where, and am I doing everything right? Am I accidentally going to commit tax fraud? And it's just a desperate situation for so many desperate people that I just wish the system was just easier and permanent, and we could be able to withstand this crisis a lot better.
And again, based on an annual means test, which is fulfilled by completing your income tax, as opposed to different monthly reporting requirements or so on. And I would add that adding the word robust in front of EI doesn't make it so. And in December, just pre-COVID, only 68% of women in this country even qualified for EI as it was. I know these things are changing, but before people just eagerly or sort of blindly say, it's going from CERB to EI, so there's still support. It's really important for people to understand how inadequate EI has been to this point. And this is where we need to also be placing our advocacy for getting good policy and practice in there.
Now, it's only fair to say that, that there are people out there, and not necessarily, this isn't necessarily a right versus left thing, but there are people, progressives, conservatives, all kinds, who don't think basic income is the way to go.
Yes.
One point that I've seen sort of put out there as well. This is great for people who are in good or reasonable health, but people with permanent disabilities, it can work against them because their extra needs are no longer recognized. How do you address that kind of criticism?
I think, and I know that there has been people who have been asked that same question, had those same concerns. And I believe that if a basic income were to roll out, it shouldn't completely replace every single welfare system. I do think that it should. I think it could be a lot more efficient or dignifying than the current social programs. But for programs such as disability support, where people have very, very, very unique needs, and often with disabilities, very expensive needs, that needs to stay in place. And I believe that there was a federal MP, Leah Gazan, who introduced a motion for a basic income in the House. And that motion included keeping those sort of supports for people with disabilities on. I think that just needs to be there. And I think there's many forms of basic income and types of basic income. And people, even within the basic income movement, disagree on which forms are the best or the worst.
Yeah, it's like anything else. Every country, if you look at our historic sort of welfare system, countries take different routes on that, and there's there are different ways of implementing these things. So the idea that it's such a blunt instrument did seem to me to be kind of missing an essential point of how this could work. Obviously, some people have different needs, but the key argument, I guess, is that for most people, it gives them a way to get off basic income. Ultimately, that this isn't about bailing people out; it's about people giving a leg up. Is that a fair kind of way of looking at it?
Definitely.
I should direct that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, people that I respect greatly, like economist Armin Yalnitsian, organizations like the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, they have some very important warnings for us to consider, for everyone to consider, that the kinds of supports that are in place, we don't want this kind of instrument that comes in and then a government says, well, you all get $2,000 a month now, so you don't need any of these extra kinds of supports. Like clearly, even in the Ontario pilot, people on Ontario Works that transitioned to the pilot were able to keep their drug card. Now, in lots of ways, one of the best arguments about this is that you would have people off a system like social assistance. There would probably still be a need in some ways for some of those tools that social assistance uses, but we would, it would have to be directed and offered in a new way. And I think there's still a lot to consider, and that's why the pilot, as it was, even after 1 year, we have really good stories from that. But I think that there was much more to test, and so this is why I would still be arguing for. Well, anyway, I think CERB has become another sort of pilot, so we do need to just implement it. But there are factors around it that would have to be tested in some ways.
Now, with regard to the kind of research that came out of the pilot, now obviously it was undermined by the fact that it was cancelled early. But what kind of what did come out of that research as far as we're able to tell?
One of the top things I'll just mention is that everyone who received basic income reported benefiting in some way. That should not be a surprise, but it does help. That's the fact that in every case, some people reported benefiting in some way. But the ways that they benefited, their reported improvements were first around physical and mental health, second around labor market participation. And you can see how the first influences the second. And then food security improved, housing stability improved, financial status and social relationships improved. So these are such vital areas, clearly, and to show within 1 year how much of a difference providing this kind of a floor makes is remarkable. And Jessie was part of this.
Yes. So there were two studies. McMaster was able to do a study, as well as the Basic Income Canada Network. Basically, like the researchers who had been hired to do the study in the first place, when the Basic Income pilot got canceled and they were subsequently fired from their positions, they still did the research anyway, and they reported that like mental health improved vastly. People were reported better well-being. People were working more, not less. And that's always seems to be a misconception for people who are opposed to basic income, is this assumption that people will work less or they'll sit on their ass playing video games all day or whatever. But that's not what happens. I think psychologically people want to do something and want to have a purpose in their lives and want to have things that motivate them and drive them. And maybe the pandemic has also helped us see that, when people are stuck inside all day waiting and wondering if it's safe to go outside and safe to interact with people or go to work, like you still want to have a purpose and a reason for living. And I think that basic income helps give people that opportunity to pursue those dreams.
Well, one of the best categories that I like, just a quick one, is how many of these studies around the world have shown that what people do on basic income is help other people. One of the first things that people talk about, and I remember my friend Tim Button, he became someone who was often the one helping other people who didn't make it onto basic income, who were turned down or whatever happened. He'd be the one supporting them with food in a month, people are generous by nature. They want to support their friends and participate in community in the best way they can. And just imagine the impact that kind of change has.
I just want to touch upon something that Jessie just mentioned about how sociologists and economists are studying this all around the world. That it should be noted that Germany is beginning a UBI pilot project to see how that might help impact the German economy in COVID. And as well, I believe a number of Scandinavian countries are experimenting with the notion as well. So this isn't a completely new, far-fetched idea. It is something that a lot of first world countries are tiptoeing around or experimenting with, or just trying to see if it's feasible. So maybe it is time for a Canadian idea to take root again.
I agree.
Yeah, well, it was us in the 70s, right? That it was Dauphin, Manitoba. That so we should be very proud that we stand in this kind of history that really is about the common good. We're talking a lot more about that these days. I hear it more anyway. Maybe I'm listening for those conversations intentionally, but that's what this is about. It really is about the common good, and that's what we need to be talking about and promoting.
It's really like, even if you do polls in Canada, over half of the population supports a basic income. And likes the idea and isn't opposed to it at all. It's very popular here in Canada. And like I said earlier, an MP tabled a motion. The Senate is in huge support of a basic income. Many of the political parties, the NDP, the Greens, and the Liberals, have all come out and said that they support a basic income. Like, it's very popular here. Like, the political will is here for it to happen here in Canada. And, I'd like to think that we're a progressive country. We brought in universal health care. Like, we're that kind of country. So we should be putting in universal basic income.
Do you think this we're seeing kind of a missed opportunity right now with the federal government kind of not choosing to go that route so far?
So far. The last word was that it was on the table. I hoped the table would be part of the throne speech, but I guess they only had chairs that day. So, it's still on the table as far as I'm concerned. And I'm really hoping that, and I really do believe that for example, the Minister of Labour and others who were just part of some correspondence and some meetings about this are dedicated to making sure that this happens. And so, like I said, our work is clear, to be calling for this now, and we'll have to see what the taste is. If it's a pilot, I would be fine, if that's how it needed to be implemented, because I do believe that there could have been better research opportunities in Ontario, and that's really what we lost, as well as the lives that we've already spoken of.
Well, I think on Jessie's note there, she did point out that the NDP are very much in favor. I think they made it part of their condition in some form or another to support the recent throne speech. The Greens, I believe, are in favor of it as well. And it should be noted that the Liberal caucus at their recent retreat did pass a policy resolution that they wanted this to become party policy at some point in November. So it may just be a matter of time to maybe find how the mechanism works. But I do find it interesting that 3 of the major political parties currently sitting in the House are very much coming out in favor of this policy idea.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I just wanted to kind of touch upon as well the transformative nature of it, not just in terms of what Deirdre was saying about the social aspects and interpersonal, but I kind of want to go back to you, Jessie, talking about starting up your own business and the kind of the entrepreneurial nature of it. That it really does say something when people say, "Oh, start up your business." It's not an easy venture to start up. It's to find capital, to develop a business plan, and to kind of wake up and go out and really pound the pavement looking for customers, clients, network and all that stuff. It does take time and resources that, as you said, you don't have time if you're working. I'm sorry, you said it was 4 part-time jobs, right?
4 jobs. Yeah.
4 jobs.
Yeah.
If you're working 4 jobs, where are you going to find the time in the business day to go knock on a door and say, "Hey, would you like my services?"
Yeah, and even the mental toll it took to switch from one job to another to focus on my business. Like it was just exhausting, just being like, okay, now I'm at job A, now I'm at job B, now I'm going to try and do photography. Like you can't do it. It's exhausting. And yeah, it's really expensive and really hard to start a business. Like oftentimes if people are starting a business, it's because they have like some sort of investor, or they have some sort of person like the founder of UBI Works. He's a CEO named Floyd Marinescu, and he has been extremely successful at his business. He runs a tech company and runs tech conferences all over the world, and he's quite wealthy because of it. But the only reason he was able to start that business is because when he was younger, he had a property that he was able to use as a rental property. So he had passive income that enabled him the time to start his business and make him the multimillionaire CEO he is today. Like, like it's that sort of thing. And I've never had that opportunity. And only now, only 2 years after basic income got canceled and after this whole journey has happened, am I finally able and in a position to take my photography business off of the shelf and start my business again. I'm really excited about doing it, but I also recognize that I have to save literally every single penny I have and live very, very, very well below my means just to make sure that I can afford this to get it started. It's still going to cost me thousands of dollars, and I'm barely making over $1,000 a month.
And the ultimate point of government should be to give people that opportunity, such as yourself, who you're obviously very skilled, you're well trained in all kinds of things. You're a pianist as well as a photographer, as well as all the other skills you have. To give people, to take away the barriers that prevent you from achieving your potential, and that seems such a natural thing for governments to get on board with. It's so discouraging that we constantly get dragged down into conversations about, well, you're just bailing out people who want to sit at home, when it's so obviously not that.
and you think about the economic impact, like there's been multiple times, like, I remember specifically there was one time I was in Winnipeg and talking about basic income. And after I had given this whole talk and presentation, and it was late at night, and I was back at the hotel, and I went over to the hotel bar just to have a drink before I went to bed. And I was talking to the bartender, and I was like, oh, I'm here for basic income. Like, what would you do if the government gave you $1,000 a month? And this bartender just she looked off in the distance, and she was like, I have this business I've always wanted to start, and I've never been able to start it. And she, and you could just see that what it would be if I had that opportunity. And that equals economic impact in a positive way. So like Michael Hampson, we as taxpayers paid for his death. And we paid for his poverty, and now he's gone, and he's not here, and he was my friend, and I miss him terribly, and I wonder what he would have to say about the state of the world right now. And we could have been paying for his life, and we could have been paying for him still being here. And there's other people who have successful businesses. Like if the basic income pilot had continued, I would be living well above the poverty line at this point. I would be a tax-paying, contributing member of society. I'd probably own a house. I'd be able to do these things and have a positive economic impact. And instead of the waste, it's the sheer waste of it that I just.
That's a really good point. Yeah. It's a really good point. I mean, it's
riled up about this, as you can tell.
That's okay. It's okay. I would probably be doing the same thing if I were in your situation. It'd be a frustrating state of affairs, to be sure.
Yeah, I think it's such an important
point. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I'm like, to quote conservative Senator Hugh Segal, bootstraps need boots.
Yeah,
good point.
And it's something occurred to me when the PCs also cancelled the increase in minimum wage. That what we do in this country, what the Western world is very good at, is subsidizing businesses to pay people badly. That if you pay people badly, people still need that money. You still need to eat. So if it's not coming from their employer, it's coming from somewhere. And guess what? It's coming out of your taxes. So I think brilliantly put to sort of point at that inefficiency of how this works. It's about using our resources in the most efficient way possible to help people succeed. And I think we need to really, as a society, need to do a better job of explaining those points. This isn't about giving handouts. This is about using what we have in the most efficient way, so we're not wasting it, and we're helping people get where they want to be.
Frankly, many people would rather give handouts than because they feel better, like about giving to the food bank and choosing other people's food for them in some privileged way makes them feel better than the idea that somehow their taxes are going to help people that are just drinking and whatever their story is. And we are, like I said, at a point in this society where we need to return to this conversation of the common good and what it means to really, we're talking here about an income security tool. When people talk about poverty, people are poor because they don't have money, not because they don't have food. Don't jump to that. Right. Fix the money problem. Let them buy their own food. Give people dignity. But we are, and basic income is a tool that provides that dignity. And I think what Jessie said earlier about paying for people to live is what we need to be about. Paying for people to be able to participate in this community and trust and know that they give it back. Because the welfare fraud rate is 3.5%, but the income tax fraud rate is 20%. So if you want to point fingers, don't be pointing at poor people or people that you would classify as poor.
Well, I mean, we just saw the news, and I don't mean to talk about Donald Trump in a negative way today because we just heard he tested positive for COVID, but we also learned this week that he paid $750 in income tax in the last decade. And so I don't understand why this whole, like, the language used against the poor people, like they're parasites, they're leeches, they're stealing taxpayers' money. And I'm like, no, the real parasites are the billionaires that are hoarding the world's wealth at the suffering of all of humanity and not paying for it.
On that note, though, it should also be pointed out that when you give 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, whatever the amount is, to low-income individuals, immediately that money is spent in their communities. They're going out and they're buying groceries. They're paying rent. They are going out maybe to dine out if they have an extra $20 or $50 after their expenses. Like they're investing into the community, or they are, as you are, Jessie, investing in an entrepreneurial endeavor that will go on to presumably employ somebody else down the line. Your business would grow, and you say, "Well, I need extra help. I'll hire somebody to kind of give me a hand," and we grow and we grow and we grow until whatever happens. And so it's thing is shouldn't necessarily also be seen as helping poor people. It should also be seen a bit more as a seed. It's like a seed investment in terms of social growth. Is that you
venture capital for humanity?
a little bit. Right. I'll be honest, because I look at this, you put money to poor people, and they go and they'll spend it, generating economic growth in downtrodden communities. Let's be honest, which is a good thing. Or, as in your case, Jessie, they're investing in a business which over time will grow into becoming a prosperous employer of multiple people, who then in turn don't need basic income to support them. It is almost like a seed venture capitalist fund from the government. Just my thoughts. I'm throwing it out there.
Yeah, no, it totally is. And like, you even think about, like, I know numerous people now who have started businesses using CERB to fund their business. And there's other people like myself, like I said, that started a business as well on basic income. There's a family in Lindsay, a husband and wife, and they have 4 kids, and they started a health food and juice shop while they were on basic income. And now that's like part of the community. And that business has like won awards for being like best new business and everything, and is a thriving part of the community. And that helps make the community better, right? And you look at, like, in the 70s, there was a basic income pilot in Dauphin, Manitoba. And when the pilot was prematurely canceled, all that data was put into boxes and put into a storage unit and just kept there for years and years and years until about a decade ago, an economist named Evelyn Forget went into that storage unit, dug out all those boxes and poured over the research. And what she saw in there was that the number of high school dropout rates dropped significantly. Healthcare dropped significantly. People were healthy, so they weren't going to hospitals. And the amount of crime dropped significantly. And there's a documentary that was done about this. And there was one interview that stuck out to me. And they interviewed this person who lives on a farm. And he said that in the 70s, when he got basic income, they bought a truck. Because they bought a truck, they could transport more livestock. Because they could transport more livestock, they could expand their farm, they can make more money. And when the interview ended, he's standing outside of a huge, industrial size scale farming operation that's been operating for over 40 years, that's benefited his family and the generations of his to come, all because the government gave him a free handout and he used it to buy a truck. Like that's the kind of tangible investment that this is. And so there's the getting people out of poverty. And then it's also just building a better economy. And I don't know anybody of any political stripe who would disagree with that.
Very, very well put. And I think, I'm not sure if it's the Canadian, the Manitoba study or another one. I know one study that was cancelled or the government decided not to go that way. One of the justifications was it allowed women to leave their husbands. Doesn't that tell you an awful lot? Probably abusive relationships. So why we can't encourage divorce. Now, okay, that was the 60s. The world has changed since. Hopefully we're beyond discussions like that. Yeah.
The number of financially vulnerable women that I know that if their marriages broke apart, they would end up in poverty is far too high. And part of the reason why I'm not married.
A whole bunch just got a raise today. Women are overrepresented in the PSW sector and so on, where the premier now says these are his good friends and really wants to support them. And this is another example of all the things that activists have been calling for years that, were never seen as good ideas at the time and now are really the top answer to what needs to happen. Pay a living wage. If you aren't able to be in a job where they do pay a living wage, like so many people will find themselves, then a basic income is available to provide that floor so that, not everybody is an entrepreneur. And a lot of the people that were on the pilot were able to just even make better choices for their employment, to move from as some people described it, working in a dirty kitchen to being able to work at the front desk of a hotel. But they were able to make that choice because they knew, if something, it's risky when you leave one job for another, even though the other looks good. But this would allow that person to leave and have a floor if it didn't work out, to be able to choose somewhere else. These are the kinds of things, the kind of freedom, the kind of participatory element that income security provides. And that's where we need to maintain our focus, not on building better emergency food support systems.
Well, on that note, Deirdre, I would also, you kind of touch upon it, that it would also create the existing jobs would become better. Because if your employer always has to worry about you quitting to go on to UBI, because it's you don't have to deal with the horrible stuff that goes along with the job, your employer has to kind of work to make sure that the job that you have is a pretty decent one in all regards, not just in terms of pay.
That's right. Precarious employment. The same professor from the Labor Studies Department, Wayne Luchuk, who was part of the team that did the one study that we were quoting from earlier around the basic income participants after 1 year, also led a study that I was part of on precarious employment in Southern Ontario. And in fact, I was surprised that it wasn't about the income level of jobs that was the most troubling in terms of precarity, but it was the instability in terms of scheduling, in terms of lack of hours and needing to have 3 of those jobs in order to try to get by and so on. And Jessie alluded to that as well. These are the elements of precarity in employment that have, again, been long fought for. And now employers may say, well, we can't schedule. And I certainly understand how that would be difficult these days to figure out what a schedule would look like. But these are the elements that make up a good job. And without them, then the government does need to provide some other element of stability, and that is the guaranteed annual income.
I mean, the catchphrase of this podcast has been, we could talk about this for hours, probably days. And we both really appreciate Deirdre and Jessie, you both coming on and speaking so passionately and with such detail about basic income. And hopefully we are now at a stage where we're having a proper discussion about it. One of the tragedies of the pilot project was that it was almost its cancellation that brought it to a lot of people's attention. Hopefully out of the embers of that tragedy, something good can come for Canada.
I think about that often because I think if the pilot hadn't been canceled, I would not be the basic income advocate I am. I would be off busy being a photographer. I wouldn't care about any of this. But also, if the pilot hadn't been canceled, Michael Hampson would still be here. So I feel very weird and mixed about it.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. We really appreciate this. And we'll
thank you.
Maybe speak again in the future. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you to Deirdre and to Jessie for those comments. It's a robust discussion, to be certain, and something that we would love to return to in future episodes, seeing how things progress on that front. In the meantime, as we mentioned in the intro, we want to focus our latter part of this episode on some ongoings happening in Hamilton City Council this week. Roland, why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, so this is a story that's received quite a bit of media attention now, and it certainly fits into an area that we are both passionate about, which is kind of how councils treat citizens and people who take part in city processes in whatever way, whether they just turn up at a council meeting to delegate or whether they're on a committee or whatever. So Cameron Kroetsch, who was, he is the chair of the Hamilton LGBTQ plus advisory committee, was censured this week by council following an investigation by the city's integrity officer, who is actually a paid consultant who they farm this out to. There have been a lot of requests for investigations by the Integrity Commissioner recently, all into members of council, but those ones have all come back, either in the negative or not come back at all as of yet. And there tends to be a long delay between a complaint being made and an answer from the Integrity Commissioner being received. But in this case, it seems to have happened quite quickly. A complaint was made, I believe, in March, and it came back now. And the Integrity Commissioner criticised Mr. Kroetsch for a number of things, one of which was releasing personal information that was in the minutes of the advisory committee of which he's a chair via Twitter. And also just generally as a member of a city committee, criticising decisions that were made by Hamilton Council. This is, to my mind, very peculiar. Well, first of all, let's just to say, I think this is bad politics. This is the kind of thing we saw in Burlington before 2018, where councillors would just, council as a whole and councillors individually would be very aggressive towards citizens who disagreed with them. And it looks bad, apart from anything else. I mean, it's just, you're shooting yourself in the foot as a politician, I think. Mm-hmm. But that's just that side of things. It's like, if you've got a brain, you don't get into these kinds of debates. The second issue is they don't seem to have, it makes what they're accusing him of doing makes no sense. The information that Cameron is accused of having released is publicly available, and is in fact publicly available on the city website in more detail than he released. He released minutes which didn't include any personal identifiable information, just mentioned a person on the police services board and a person on an employee of the city. Didn't name them. Both of those people are perfectly well known to everybody. One was a neo-fascist who was working for the city. Another is a publicly known appointee to the police services board. So to say he was releasing anything when he didn't even name them is ludicrous.
I think it should also be pointed out that we're talking very, very vague descriptions of individuals that you'd have to be a follower of municipal politics in detail to put two and two together on this one, because we've both seen the tweet in question that got Mr. Kroetsch into trouble. And I have to admit, I don't really see any damning evidence on it. It's a very suspicious motivation on the part of City Council to go after Mr. Kroetsch in this manner, and very overhanded. It should be pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, it's heavy-handed approach. Now, Cameron Kroetsch has run for council himself as a candidate in the last election, and this is the kind of thing where council members and staff will treat citizens somewhat differently if they think they have political ambitions, but they shouldn't. It makes no difference. Everybody should be treated with the same respect, and the idea that a member of an advisory committee who is a very well-known, very prominent activist is expected to give up their right to express an opinion when they take a role on an advisory committee, which is a volunteer, unpaid role, kind of is just
part of
silly, in my opinion.
Part of the role of an advisory committee, I think, it would be to provide valid criticism of city policy and to provide where shortcomings on city policy is. The advisory board in question here was to address the LGBTQ relationship with City Council, how to strengthen it and how to better it. So you'd have to assume that to be a little bit of criticism and a little bit of critiquing there of, hey, we're falling short on addressing a number of issues that are relating to this community, and how do we better go incorporate, including this community into the decision-making, policy-making process. The actions of City Council, I think, have shaken a lot of people's faith that the City Council is operating in best spirits of the city as a whole. And the fact that shortly after this decision was rendered on a 12-2 vote in favor of a reprimand for Mr. Kroetsch, that Councillor Terry Whitehead took to Twitter and started to ponder out loud other ways to use the Integrity Commissioner's office to curb dissension amongst other committees and other activist groups within the city, which is not a position or something you want to hear from an elected official. It's just bullying, frankly.
Yeah, it's ludicrous. I mean, he aimed a tweet at an organization which is entirely independent. It's not even a city committee. I mean, it makes no sense, but that doesn't take away from the absolutely disgusting behavior that he's trying to. These are barely veiled threats. Phrases like, maybe you should consider whether the Integrity Commissioner has a role. Things like this. We know what he's saying. We've been doing some investigation. I mean, I don't want to put too grandiose a theme on that, but we're going to address this more next week. And we're hoping to have, we are going to have Cameron Kroetsch on the podcast to talk about it himself. But there are a number of questions that the city needs to answer, in particular how they are justifying passing this to the Integrity Commissioner at all, when according to their own bylaw, Integrity Commission doesn't have this power. Now, city can criticize whoever it wants. They have the power, but they didn't assign that, they didn't delegate that role to the Integrity Commissioner in their own bylaw in 2016. But, we'll look more into that next week before we go into the details. But it's troubling to say the least. And this is, we've been talking about this repeatedly over the last few weeks, of this tone of toxicity, of bullying, Now, a lot of the really worst stuff is just coming from one or two people, but the mayor has to ask the question, are you going to sit at the head of a council and tolerate this? And apparently the answer is yes, because he has been willing to take part in this criticism of Mr. Kroetsch, and is completely silent on the behaviour of the most vocal members of his council, who are behaving, I think, really disgracefully.
Well, not only that, but I think it should also be noted that the council vote was 12-2. This wasn't a thin majority of people who agree. The majority of the council thought that this was the correct course of action to take against Mr. Kroetsch, and it raises a question of who else is the council going to go after? The precedent that this raises of a municipal council using their powers to go after dissenting citizens at the municipal level is a scary proposition, especially when you think of how often we as citizens interact mostly with our municipal levels of government more frequently and more robustly. It's a shocking turn of events, and it's a dangerous course of action. I think that Mayor Eisenberger does he want to go down this path? Where does it end?
And I mean, I think I should also mention it. I'm on the record. I've been involved with things to do with advisory committees in Burlington. I'm on the record as saying I think advisory committees have all kinds of problems that come out of the nature of the people who volunteer for them. Now, there's nothing wrong with the volunteers. These are highly skilled, often very passionate people, but there are things that I think could change there for sure. However, we're talking about the rules as they exist right now, and the rules are that people like Cameron Kroetsch can be on a committee, and unless they have set out very explicitly that by being on this committee you give up your right to an opinion almost, then he cannot be doing anything wrong. I mean, it's ridiculous, and I mean, it is a dichotomy, if you like, in the way that municipalities work. So if you think of the province, we have parties. And no one expects a member of the opposition to praise the Premier and to go along with what the Premier says, or to suggest that the Premier's or the governing party's legislation is good. In fact, that in a municipal context, there kind of is that expectation. We saw it again. I'm sorry to always bring it back to Burlington, but one of the things that Marianne Mead Ward, who's now the mayor, was criticised for was, not that kind of sense of corporate responsibility that whatever council votes for, even if you think it stinks, you have to then defend publicly, which I think is just it's kind of an unnatural act. If you think something is not good policy, I don't really see how anybody can be expected to go along with it. Particularly if they're already on the record.
It should be pointed that the city council is not a cabinet. Cabinets are expected. When a decision is made, cabinets are supposed to all line up behind the decision and support it. If you don't support it, get out. City councils are not that way. The city councils are by their nature designed to be a sometimes combative, mostly collaborative effort. The idea is they're smaller. We're not talking 80 or 300 person bodies here. We're talking 6, 10, 12, maybe 15, depending on the size of the municipality, but relatively a smaller group of people who are able to have conversations, be more civil, and have an actual discussion on how best to spend tax dollars and where energies should be focused. If the idea of now that the Hamilton City Council, instead of having these discussions about policy, they'd rather use their efforts and tax dollars to go after citizens who seek to either address perceived grievances to the city council, real or imagined. It says a lot more about this council, just that they are not willing to be. They don't want to act like a democracy. They want their way and they don't want dissent, and that's not the way our system is set up.
And it speaks to that. Unfortunately, this is a pattern. I've certainly seen it in 2 cities now. I suspect it's not uncommon in other cities. Politicians have been around a bit too long. They're too comfortable, and they get fed up with all the people coming in and criticizing them, which is their job to hear. And they become arrogant and they become aggressive. Mm-hmm. It's not good enough. And the fact that a councillor can publicly, in all kinds of forums, call people he disagrees with morons and not get criticised, whereas someone can point out or can argue that an appointment to the Police Services Committee or the employment of a recognised neo-Nazi by the city is maybe not the best situation to have, does get condemned. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, it's a question of what exactly is going on in Hamilton City Council. This is something that we're hoping to address next week, and talking with Mr. Kroetsch to get his side of the story. And we're also going to address some changes that were made mysteriously to the City Council website in terms of their bylaws that we discovered and we publicized on our Twitter account. We hopefully will address that more in detail next week as we're working on that story. But there's a lot of questions about, is this the path the Hamilton City Council wants to go down? Is that rather than having a nuanced, thought-provoking discussion on policy and spending at the municipal level, they'd rather use your tax dollars, to go after their perceived enemies. And if that's the case, that's just a dangerous path for any political body to go down.
And I do think, I mean, maybe I'm drawing too big parallels here, but I'm going to draw them anyway. It's this degrading of the tone of public discourse that again, I'm sorry to say it, but President Trump typifies. That we now get our little tin pot Trumps in cities across Canada and across, who think, well, yeah, you can behave like this. You can behave like a thug and get elected. And it's not good enough. I mean, I don't think it will work in places like Hamilton. I think, this is a council that is in a desperate state and is long overdue for some very significant change. It's unfortunate that at the last election, the choices were so weren't great, in my opinion, in terms of the head of council, as the alternative was not an alternative. But hopefully there are some better candidates in terms of the leadership of the council. I'm not talking about individual wards here at the next election.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. This is something that we're not going to let fall by the wayside. If this turns into a habitual thing with City Council, which based on previous experience, it will be. It's something that I think you and I, Roland, and hopefully our listeners will want us to stay on top of and keep us apprised. And we're not letting this go. To us, it seems like an abuse of power. It's an overreach of authority. Something fishy is going on here, and we want to ask some questions. That's it. We want to ask some questions to get to the bottom and find out what's going on. So, I mean, next week we're going to be talking about it in depth. The entire episode, I think from start to finish, is going to be focusing on what's been going on at Hamilton City Council and how we can, how can we address that, and where does City Council and the various communities that make up Hamilton, where do they go from here? So please subscribe and like so you don't miss that, and tune in next week to hear our conversation with Mr. Cameron Kroetsch. Is there anything else, Roland, or should we do the sign-off?
I think we can go to the sign-off. One thing I'll add, if you live in another city in the 905 and you're aware of similar behaviour in your city, let us know. Because I do think this is... I have significant familiarity with two cities out of the 905. And I can't really speak personally to Brampton or Markham or wherever. If you live there, let us know what's going on. We need to know because the two cities I'm familiar with both have instances of this kind of behavior within recent history, and it's not good enough. So on that note, if you do know of anything suspicious happening in your municipal government, give us an email, info@905er.ca. As well, we'll accept your criticism and your suggestions for better how to make this podcast better. We love to hear from you. As well, you can find us on social media at the 905er on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as on LinkedIn now. And please like and subscribe wherever you find us on your podcast.
We hope that you do so that we can boost our standings. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
You looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.